Welcome everyone to the session of marketing research and analysis. Now we are coming to towards the end of the session where we are going to discuss on certain important topics. One of them being the role of ethics in marketing research, right. Till date we have discussed about marketing research as a whole. What is marketing research? What is the application of marketing research? How marketing research is useful for companies, for researchers and everybody. But today we will discuss on certain there have been a lot of controversial issues relating to the field of marketing, right. Several companies, for example, have been accused, they have been been accused of unethical practices, right. Several researchers have been accused of unethical practices. So, marketing, because of the intense competition, because of the cutthroat competition around, marketers also have fallen prey to sometimes utilizing or adopting unethical practices. So, what is this ethics all about, and why are marketers so vulnerable, and how should one researcher stay away from it, right. So, today ethics has become a very important discussion, right. In many management schools today, the people are being taught about ethics through several even important religious books also being taken help of, supported by like the Bhagavad Gita being used to explain ethics in day to day life and all. So, marketing research, for example, let me cite an example which you must have heard of. For example, Xerox, the case of Xerox, Enron were very popular at one point of time, because these companies were involved in some kind of misgovernance and unethical practices, right. So, because of as the result of it, what has happened is lot of stakeholders were unhappy, and the money of the stakeholders were also at loss, right. So, and even in cases it has been seen that researchers, to find certain data, to get certain information and companies to get certain information about their competitors and others, they try to adopt certain practices which cannot be considered good, right, and they are considered unethical. So, what is this ethics? Let us see ethics in marketing research, right. So, some of the ethical dilemmas in marketing research, for example, let us this is an example we started with. Company A gets poor response rates in its mail surveys, so it uses fictitious letterhead labeled public opinion research industries. Now, suppose you do not get, now this is a common discussion, researchers say, sir, we are not getting information, or we do not get enough responses from people. That does not mean that you are going to use some practice which is not called for, right, which is not expected from a researcher, right. A researcher is expected to be honest all the time. So, this is a case of misidentification one should avoid. Another case, 80% of physicians recommend that consumers use no margarine, right. Of the remaining 20%, that means 80% is gone, 20% remains, a majority recommended brand A. Brand A now adds, say, recommended by physicians. Now, this is a case of misinterpretation. Why? Because 80% were of a different category, only 20% recommended brand A. Now, this 20%, because of this 20%, if you say that recommended by physicians, which many companies today are saying, you must have seen advertisements where it is being said 99.93, 67.46. Now, how did they come to such a conclusion? It is very strange, it is very difficult. So, there is somewhere a case of negligence or a deliberate attempt to hamper ethics, right. Similarly, unethical practices have also been seen in advertising. Many advertising companies compete against each other, and then they try to put some other competitors in a very bad light by misrepresenting the cases, right. There was a very popular case of Bisleri in India, Parle Bisleri, versus the Eureka Forbes, where the company had went into the court and finally they had to settle down, right. So, there are several cases of this you listen and come to listen, because in management and marketing, at least because of the severe competition, right. Some more ethical dilemmas. ABC Marketing calls customers on the phone to assess their satisfaction with the current house, right. After getting the opinions, ABC tries to sell the customers the new siding, right. Now this is a case which is generally being done by most of the marketers. So, as a result, what they have done, in the guise of doing some research, they have actually tried to push their sales forward, right. Similarly, company X is required by its state public service commission to assess the impact of a rate increase on low income customers, right. Company X research shows that low income consumers would be adversely affected by the rate change, right. When asked how the rate change would affect such customers, company X says they did not reach to answer this question. So, now this is something a misrepresentation again, right. So, such kind of cases, when a company takes into account or tries to use these techniques, it is a case of unethics or unethical behavior. Should researchers be concerned about ethics? The question is this: why should researchers be concerned about ethics? What is the role of ethics? How does ethics help? See, I will give an example. The very famous case of Johnson and Johnson. Johnson and Johnson once had by mistake had in one of its batch of products had a wrong product got into the in the packaging, right. To avoid any possible accident, Johnson and Johnson pulled back all the products from the market, from the shelf. Now, as a result, in the short term, Johnson and Johnson lost money in the market, right. It lost precious money, but what did it gain? Johnson and Johnson gained an immense and very high brand value, a good nice public image, right. As a result of it, Johnson and Johnson immediately became a very large positive company, right, or its opinion about Johnson and Johnson from public was very positive, which directly affected its sales again, right. So, should researchers be concerned about ethics? We are not only talking about marketers, but also researchers, right. Yes. Now, what are the reasons? Ethical practices enhance the public's acceptance of marketing research. So, let us say if you are using ethical practices, for example, if you have conducted some study, let us say in our institution we have used some study, and this study is people know that it is only used for academic purpose and not for any other purpose, and the faith is there, then automatically the people's acceptance or participation increases. Okay. Ethical practices can improve marketers' sensitivity to their customers, right, the case of Johnson & Johnson. Third, ethical practices can help forestall government intervention and regulation, right. If you are following ethical standards or ethical practices, even government intervention unnecessarily would not be required, which is highly maybe positive for any marketer. Okay. So, consideration of ethics in research and general business for that matter is of growing importance, as I said, right. With so many companies falling prey to some or the other unethical behavior, as I said, Enron, Anderson, Xerox, many right, many companies. So, as a result of it today ethics has become a very important part and parcel of marketing research. Okay. It is therefore critical that you understand the basics of ethical research and how this might affect your research project. Okay. So, marketing research has experienced a resurgence with a widespread use of the internet and the popularity of social marketing. Today, if you see, earlier to do a research, it used to be very difficult because it had to be people had to go physically and do it. But today with internet and social networking, it has become very easy to reach somebody. But the question is, with the easiness, or with its simplicity, it has also created some other relationship complexities. Okay. Researchers are becoming closer in term of intimacy as well as physical proximity to the respondents. True. Ethical problems are relationships kinds of problems, thus that is ethical problems occur only when an individual will interact with other people. So, suppose you are a researcher and you are conducting a research. Okay. The question is, how ethical are you in terms of the data, in terms of the data collection, in terms of the getting the sample, in terms of the filling up the data. So, all these things are part of the process. Okay. In 1963, Dr. Dick Warren, a professor of marketing and quantitative management science at the University of Missouri in St. Louis, first time proposed a code of ethics. If you go to the internet also and type it out, MRA code of conduct, you will find a healthy document which cites which tells you about what are the code of conduct that a researcher needs to follow when he is doing some kind of a research. Okay. And he was also a member of the American Marketing Association. Now, historical context of ethical issues in marketing. The code was prompted by three main issues. So, when the ethical code of conduct was made, mainly it depended on three things: the desire to maintain public confidence in marketing research procedures. Otherwise, what had happened was, in the guise of improving sales, people just they tried to pretend that they were doing a research, but actually they were pushing their sales. So, to avoid this, they the first pillar was desire to maintain public confidence in marketing research procedures. Okay. The second was the need to self regulate the discipline before outsiders decide marketing research need. That means, before the government or any public organization or body thought that, for example, the very famous case of Microsoft, where the US federal interfered in the process of working of Microsoft. Now, when the government interferes, obviously there is the smooth flow of functioning of the companies would get affected. So, before that happens, marketers need to self regulate themselves. The third pillar is the concern to maintain a public positive image of the marketing in general. Generally, if you see, generally when you talk about marketing or sales, for example, people first of all they feel that there is something mischief in it, there is something negative in it, right. So, companies have to change their image, the public they have to create a positive image, as Johnson and Johnson created, as companies like Procter and Gamble have done in the years of their history. They have tried to maintain a positive image, so that they have there is a saying, the service of Hewlett Packard is so good that if you are at some other side of the earth also they would provide you a service. Now, such a word of mouth only gives you a very positive feedback about the company. So, what are ethics? Okay. Simply, ethics addresses whether a particular action is right or wrong, good or bad. Now, simply that means what? You ask your conscience and say okay, whether what we have done is right or wrong, whether it is bad or good for the public at large, right. Societal norms adopted by a group, it is some other definition says, is a societal norms adopted by a group. So, a conception of conduct that is right or wrong. Now, when you are, what do you feel, whether it is correct, it is good for the society or not, this is what is ethics. Deal with fundamental human relationships, it is a universal human trait. Okay. So, what are the ethical principles, right? Guides to moral behavior: good, honesty, keeping promises, helping others, respective right of others; bad, lying, stealing, deceiving, harming others. Now, these are some of the ethical principles which marketers today have understood, that if they do not use this ethical principles, then it will be very difficult for them to sustain and grow in the market, because today's customer is very educated and sensitive, and his access to information is very high. So, he can easily compare, right. Universality of ethical principles should apply in the same manner in all countries, cultures and communities, right. It should be ethically universality should be there. That means whatever ethical principles are there, they should be applicable to everybody, right, every place. On the other hand, there is a relativity of principles also. Sometimes this might vary from country to country, community to community. Now this is more connected with the habits and tradition of the cultures of the people, right. In some culture, for example, hugging somebody might be taken as very positive, and in some it might not be so. So that is where the relativity comes in, right. So but one has to be very clear in what they are doing or what they mean by ethics, right. If you look at the reasons for ethical business, why should anybody be ethical in nature? How being ethical is useful to a business enterprise or a researcher at large, right. Fulfill public expectations for business. So the public expectations, if you do not fulfill or do not stand by it, then the public might the loyalty factor might you might lose on loyalty, okay. Prevent harming others, right. Improve business relations. So ethical business helps in improving business relations. If you look at the B2B side, the B2B industry, most of the relationships, the business between the B2B, the one organization to the other, most of the business is done on basis of business relationships, right. What is the personal relationship between the clients, right. So that improves when you stand with some ethical reasoning, right. It helps in improving employee productivity. It has been seen organizations which are highly ethical, there the people are more happier, and thus the productivity of the people is much higher than in comparison to organizations where unethical practices are a part of the process, right. Reduce penalties, protect business from others, right, protect employees from their employers, promote personal morality. So these are some of the reasons for having an ethical business behavior. So if you follow an ethical business behavior, these are the benefits that a marketer finds, right. Why do we need to worry about ethics in marketing research? Again this question is coming back. Why do we need to? But I have given several examples. If you do not, then what is happening? Your goodwill is lost in the market, your hard earned brand value which you have earned in the market for such a long time, you might lose on that, right. So three things: integrity, truth and commitment. A researcher has the responsibility to treat respondents fairly in a research study and has a responsibility to the client to gather accurate, reliable information. Suppose there could be a researcher on a personal level, for example a student conducting a research, or there are marketing research organizations, for example IMRB, right, Nielsen, so which conduct research studies for other companies like syndicate research, right, and then they sell off this data to others on a maybe they sell off to other companies. The primary job of a researcher is to treat the respondents, the people from where they are getting the data, in a fair manner, right, and has the responsibility to the client to gather accurate, reliable information. Now many a times accuracy of the information, reliability of the information is always questionable, right. What if the researcher has not taken enough pain and was not honest to extract the right information, and in just to finish his work he has given information which might not be accurate or correct. So in such a condition, if this happens, then there would be a problem that in the future the outcome of the research output which would be used by the marketer, that would have a very negative value in itself, right, and this information would be highly untrustworthy and highly unreliable, okay. Potential for harm. It is your responsibility to consider whether any type of harm could occur as part of your research, and you need to ensure that mechanisms are instituted to remove this potential harm. Now what does it mean? It is the researcher's responsibility to consider that if if he or she conducts a particular research, and by this if any part of the research work could impact or harm the respondent or the client, then such should be avoided, such cases should be avoided. Now how does it, for example, leaking the confidential informations, right, for a certain for a short term gain might not be very wise, might not be worthy enough to do, because by doing this the not only the marketer loses its own personal image, but it harms the respondents confidentiality, and thus it affects negatively more or less. Okay. Some of the harm that can be done. So for the what are the harm? So potential is psychological harm first. For example, use of nudity in advertising may show participant images that offend them, right. So this is going to create a psychological harm. So psychologically the respondent might get disturbed, he might not be interested to further participate in such kind of research processes, right. Financial harm, researching unethical behavior within a given firm, an individual being fired can get fired, share sensitive information with the firm's competitors, all this could lead to financial harm to the organization, right. If you fire somebody, if you pass on the sensitive information to the competitors. Third is social harm, researching how lifestyle affects consumption, disclose a person's, let us say, sexual orientation when that person wanted to keep this confidential. Many a times, in most of the times rather, while conducting a research we say that this data would be used only and only for academic purposes or maybe some other purpose, and would not be divulged or disclosed to others without the permission of the respondent. But and there are certain information studies, research can be done on several studies, right. For example, the sexuality of a person, the income of a person, behavioral traits of a person, right. So when you are doing this, by ignoring these things you are causing social harm, right. So what should you do? Ensure that you behave according to the appropriate ethical standards. The best thing is, please go through the Marketing Research Association's code of conduct and go through it, right. Consider how your research might negatively affect participants. So if you consider it thoroughly, that while conducting a research, if I am going to use this information, how is it going to affect my client, or how is it going to affect my respondent. So if it is going to negatively affect my participants, my respondents, then the researcher should avoid this case, right. Protect yourself, your supervisor, teachers, your institution from being placed in situations in which individuals could make claims of inappropriate behavior, right, resulting in public criticism or even you being sued. So suppose a researcher is taken very positively, very highly. Suppose you are getting into a situation where the individual is making a claim. For example, in research papers, many a times researchers claim something without proper research backing, and when the claim, then what happens, generally we say it nothing would affect because nobody is going through the research papers to sue you. But there have been cases where the researchers have been sued and have been questioned. Even if you have seen at the end of the research your mail IDs are given, your contact details are given, so that any researcher can contact you and ask for clarity, right. So if you have done given some claims which are not proper, then not only you but your institution might get criticized. So we should avoid situations of this kind. Okay. Is this ethical? There are few issues we will see. I will ask you few questions and we will see whether these are ethical or not according to you, right. The first case, a research company decides to leave a message on prospective respondents. What is he doing? A research company decides to leave a message on prospective respondents answering machine, telling them that if they call back in the next 24 hours, they will receive a valuable prize if they take part in a survey. So, is this ethical or not ethical? Please take your time and think about it for a second. Okay. Now, let me show you. It is ethical as long as it is true. If that means if the firm is following its promise, that means it is trying to maintain its promise what it has said, then it is ethical, there is no problem with it. Okay. Next case, upon completion of an interview, the respondent is asked to provide the names and telephone numbers of others he or she thinks should take part in the survey. Is this ethical or not ethical? Again, take your time, think before you jump to a conclusion, think. Please, it is better if you write your answers on a sheet of paper somewhere where you are reading, right, or listening to me. Okay. It is ethical. In fact, there is nothing wrong in it, because one type of sampling, if you have not forgotten and you remember it, then was called the referral or the snowball sampling, where we asked the respondents to give the some more details about, or more respondents numbers or details, so that we could contact them through their behalf. Okay. Okay. A door to door salesman finds that by telling people that he is conducting a survey, they are more likely to listen to his sales pitch. What is happening here? A door to door salesman finds that by telling people that he is conducting a survey, they are more likely to listen to his sales pitch. Is this ethical or unethical? Again, you please think and write down. Okay. Now, let me go to the answer. It is unethical. It is called sugging. Now, there are two types of fruging and sugging. Sugging is a process where the researcher tries to feign or tries to prove that he is conducting a research, but in the guise he is actually trying to improve his sales, right. So, he is doing nothing but he is doing a sales, but in the guise of a research, right. So, this is an unethical practice. So, researchers should avoid such situations. Okay. So, this is called sugging. What is fruging? I just said fruging is another case where you must have seen nowadays very popularly people, organizations are trying to raise funds, right, by showing that they are conducting some kind of research, maybe on certain diseases, certain kinds of social groups, or certain neglected people in the society. So, when they are doing such kind of a practice, that means they are trying to use fundraising, they are doing fundraising on behalf, on the name of research, it is called fruging. Okay. The fourth one, the cover letter of a mail questionnaire says that it will only take few minutes to fill out. Okay. But pre-tests have shown that at least 15 minutes are needed to fill it out. Is this a case of ethical behavior or not? Again the question comes. So, I think it is very clear, unethical, as few is vague, right. So, when you say few, you are not making it clear, but if it is taking 15 minutes, sometimes it could be large for somebody, right. Telephone interviewers are instructed to assure that respondent of confidentiality only if the respondent asks about it. Now, what is it saying? If you listen to it carefully, telephone interviewers are instructed to assure the respondent of confidentiality only if the respondent asks. Ethical. Suppose you are following it, that means you are not divulging the information to others, then it is ethical. A client insists on inspecting the completed questionnaires to assess their validity, but the researcher suspects that the client is really interested in finding out what specific respondents said about the client. He is not interested in all, he is interested only to find out specific clients respondents said about the client. So, is this ethical? No, it is not ethical. It is unethical if the survey is confidential or anonymous. Okay. I think this is the last. If the appendix of a final report, the researcher lists the names of all respondents who took part in the survey and places an asterisk besides the name of those who indicated agreement to be contacted by the client's cell personnel. So, is this ethical or not? Let us see. Ethical. Why? Because the client has agreed to do this. So, these are things, these are some of the points that the researcher needs to keep in mind when we talk about ethical issues, right. So, what we will do is we will continue with the ethical part of marketing research in the next session, right, and thanks for this session.